"Get away from me. He's dangerous." The voice of Mrs. Rebecca Stevens echoed through the chemistry classroom at Whitmore Preparatory Academy, one of the most elite private schools in the country. Her face was flushed red, her hands trembling as she pointed an accusatory finger at a black boy, 17-year-old Marcus Johnson, who stood there with his hands raised defensively, confusion and hurt written across his face. The classroom erupted into chaos. Students gasped, chairs scraped against the floor, and dozens of phones came out, recording what was about to become one of the most shocking incidents in the school's prestigious history. In the corner, Brad Wellington, a white student in the school, stood with a satisfied smirk spreading across his face, watching his plan unfold perfectly. Mrs. Stevens was now frantically dialing her phone, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. 911? I need the police immediately. I have a violent black student threatening me and other students. He's completely out of control. Marcus, his voice breaking with raw emotion, pleaded desperately. "Mrs. Stevens, please, you know me. I've been nothing but respectful to you and everyone in this school. Why are you doing this to me?" But his calm, respectful plea only seemed to fuel her hysteria further. "Don't you dare talk back to me," she screamed into the phone. "Officers, you need to hurry. He's getting more aggressive by the second." The sound of sirens began wailing in the distance, growing closer and closer to the school. Marcus looked around the classroom at his classmates, some recording, others staring in shock, a few already knowing this was wrong but too afraid to speak up. Then he looked directly ahead, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. If you're ready to hear this incredible story of injustice, revenge, and ultimate triumph, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now, because this is just the beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. If you stand against racism and injustice, type yes in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. But to understand how we got to that explosive moment in the chemistry classroom, how a brilliant honor student became the target of a racist teacher and jealous classmates, and how 5 minutes changed all their lives forever, we need to go back to where it all began. 2 months earlier, 17-year-old Marcus Johnson walked through the pristine marble halls of Whitmore Preparatory Academy for the first time. This wasn't just any school. This was where America's elite sent their children, where senators' kids rubbed shoulders with tech billionaires' offspring, where a single year's tuition cost more than most people's annual salary. Marcus had transferred from Chicago after his mother received a major promotion that required them to relocate. What the other students didn't know, what even the teachers didn't know, was exactly who his mother was. Marcus kept that information private, preferring to let his own merit speak for itself. And boy, did it speak volumes. From day one, Marcus was different. While other students struggled with advanced placement courses, Marcus sailed through them effortlessly. His test scores were perfect. Not just good, not just impressive. Perfect. Within weeks, Ivy League recruiters were calling the school asking about this brilliant new student who was already making waves in academic circles. But Marcus's arrival didn't just create excitement, it created a problem. A big problem for some people who had gotten very comfortable being at the top of the food chain. One of them was Brad Wellington III. 18 years old, blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a blazer that cost more than most cars. Brad wasn't just any student at Whitmore Prep. His family had donated the entire new science wing. Wellington Hall was named after his grandfather. His great-grandfather was one of the school's founding members. For 4 generations, the Wellingtons had been the golden standard at this institution. Brad had spent his entire life being told he was special, being groomed for greatness, being promised that Harvard was his birthright. He was the valedictorian track student, the one teachers praised, the one other students looked up to. He had his crew of equally privileged friends who followed his every move. Connor Hayes, the football captain, built like a linebacker with an ego to match. Dylan Pierce, student body president, smooth-talking politician in training. Jason Thornfield, son of a tech mogul, who thought his daddy's money made him untouchable. These boys had never been challenged, never been told no, never had to work for anything in their lives. And then there was Ashley Morrison, Brad's girlfriend, the perfect accessory to his perfect life. Blonde, beautiful, from the right family, saying all the right things. At least that's how it appeared on the surface. Watching over this privileged paradise was Principal Charles Whitmore, grandson of the school's founder, a man who believed deeply in maintaining the traditions and standards that had made Whitmore Prep what it was. But it was Mrs. Rebecca Stevens who would become the most dangerous player in this story. 45 years old, 20 years of teaching at Whitmore under her belt, advanced chemistry was her domain. To most people, she appeared professional, polished, the picture of academic excellence. She spoke about maintaining educational standards, about preserving the school's reputation, about ensuring only the right kind of students succeeded. What people didn't see was what lurked beneath that polished exterior. Mrs. Stevens had deep-seated racial resentments that she'd carefully hidden for decades. She believed that certain students didn't belong at Whitmore, that some people were getting opportunities they hadn't earned, that the school's traditions were being threatened by outsiders who didn't understand or respect what Whitmore represented. When Marcus Johnson walked into her chemistry class that first day, something inside Mrs. Stevens immediately bristled. Here was this confident, articulate young black man who didn't seem intimidated by the prestigious surroundings, who didn't appear grateful or deferential, who acted like he belonged there. And then Marcus started excelling. Not just doing well, dominating. In chemistry lab, while other students struggled with basic equations, Marcus was solving complex problems that left even Mrs. Stevens amazed, though she tried hard not to show it. He understood concepts that took other students weeks to grasp. His lab reports were flawless. His test scores were perfect. But it wasn't just chemistry. Marcus was excelling in every single class. Advanced mathematics, physics, literature, history. It didn't matter the subject. Marcus was at the top. Teachers who had been at Whitmore for decades said they'd never seen anything like it. While Marcus was quietly revolutionizing the academic landscape at Whitmore Prep, Brad Wellington was watching his entire world crumble. For the first time in his life, Brad wasn't the smartest person in the room. For the first time ever, there was someone better than him, and that someone was everything Brad had been taught to look down upon. The breaking point came when the annual National Science Competition was announced. This wasn't just any competition. This was the most prestigious academic competition in the country. The winner didn't just get a trophy or recognition. The winner got automatic admission to Harvard University, plus a $100,000 scholarship. For Brad, this competition represented everything. His father had won it 30 years ago. His grandfather had placed second in his year. This was supposed to be Brad's moment, his guaranteed ticket to Harvard, his proof that the Wellington legacy lived on. Brad had assumed he would represent Whitmore Prep. The teachers had assumed it. His parents had assumed it. Harvard had practically reserved a spot for him based on this expectation. But then Marcus Johnson arrived, and suddenly Brad's guaranteed victory wasn't so guaranteed anymore. The selection for who would represent the school was based on comprehensive testing, and those tests were scheduled for the following week. As Marcus continued to excel day after day, as teachers began whispering about this incredible new student, as Brad watched his throne slowly being taken away from him, something dark began growing inside the privileged halls of Whitmore Preparatory Academy. Brad Wellington wasn't going to let some outsider from Chicago destroy everything he'd been promised. He wasn't going to let his family legacy be tarnished by losing to someone who, in his mind, didn't belong there in the first place. And unfortunately for Marcus Johnson, Brad had allies who felt exactly the same way. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. What happened next at Whitmore Preparatory Academy was a systematic campaign designed to break Marcus Johnson, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. It started subtly. Brad Wellington and his crew began accidentally bumping into Marcus in hallways, sending his books flying. "Oops, sorry," Connor Hayes would smirk. "Guess you need to watch where you're going in our school." The comments followed. "Must be nice being a diversity hire," Dylan Pierce would mutter. Jason Thornfield would question with fake concern. "Do you really think you belong here? The standards at Whitmore are pretty intense." Marcus ignored them completely, focusing on his studies. He thought his academic excellence would speak for itself. He was wrong. Week 1 escalated quickly. Marcus's textbooks went missing from chemistry class. Lab partners suddenly refused to work with him, claiming they'd already formed groups. "Nothing personal?" One student said apologetically. "It's just, you know how competitive things are here." Week 2 brought direct attacks. Marcus arrived at his locker to find racial slurs spray-painted across the metal. During lunch, Connor would accidentally bump his table daily, sending food flying across the cafeteria. "So clumsy of me," Connor would announce loudly. "Maybe you should sit somewhere safer." By week 3, the harassment invaded his academic life. Teachers received anonymous tips questioning Marcus's work, suggesting his essays were too sophisticated for his background. Rumors spread that his perfect grades couldn't be legitimate, that he must be cheating somehow. Week 4 brought physical intimidation. Brad's crew cornered Marcus in empty hallways, using their size to threaten him. "You think you're so smart?" Connor would growl, towering over Marcus. In locker rooms, Dylan made threatening comments. Chicago kids who don't learn respect have a way of disappearing. Week 5 went digital. Fake social media accounts appeared overnight, posting Marcus's photo with claims he was a drug dealer, had been expelled from Chicago, was dangerous and unstable. The cyberbullying was sophisticated, designed to destroy his reputation and college prospects. Through all this systematic harassment, Marcus Johnson did something that amazed even his tormentors. He didn't break. His grades remained perfect. His demeanor stayed calm. He documented everything meticulously. Photos, screenshots, detailed notes with dates and witnesses. He called his mother but downplayed the situation. "How's school going?" she'd ask. "It's fine, Mom. Just competitive prep school stuff. My grades are great. Don't worry about me." Meanwhile, Brad was growing furious. During a private meeting with his crew, his rage was evident. "We've thrown everything at him, and he's still outscoring all of us. This nobody from Chicago is making us look like complete idiots. Our families built this school." The harassment reached its peak when Brad's crew publicly confronted Marcus after school, surrounding him in the parking lot where other students gathered to watch. Connor shoved Marcus hard. "Time to learn some respect." Dylan circled behind him. "You need to know your place before someone gets hurt." But Marcus did something unexpected. Instead of fighting or running, he stayed calm and used his intelligence as a weapon. "Connor, you're football captain but ranked 47th academically. Dylan, you needed 3 attempts to pass basic calculus. Jason, your father bought your way into every program, and you still need tutors." His voice carried clearly to the crowd. "You're not angry because I don't belong here. You're angry because I do belong here, and that threatens everything you've been told about your superiority." The crowd was silent, some recording on phones. Ashley Morrison watched from the edge, seeing her boyfriend and his friends for who they really were. "The truth is," Marcus concluded calmly, "you're scared. Scared that privilege isn't enough anymore. Scared that you can't compete on a level playing field." His intellectual victory would prove temporary because desperate privileged people are the most dangerous of all. Throughout this harassment, one adult should have protected Marcus but chose not to. Mrs. Rebecca Stevens. She witnessed the bullying but turned a blind eye. When Marcus reported the locker vandalism, she dismissed it coldly. "Mr. Johnson, I think you're misinterpreting what's happening. What you call harassment might be cultural misunderstandings. Perhaps you're too sensitive for Whitmore's competitive environment. Sometimes students from different backgrounds find it difficult to adjust to our standards." Marcus left knowing he was truly alone, facing systematic harassment with no adult support. What he didn't realize was that his tormentors were about to escalate beyond anything he could imagine. If you're enjoying this story, hit the subscribe button now, because this story will keep you engaged till the end. At the Wellington family dinner table, Brad's father, William Wellington Jr., a prominent businessman whose name appeared on Forbes lists and political donor rolls, sat at the head of their mahogany dining table in their mansion overlooking the city. The conversation that night pushed Brad over the edge into desperation. 4 generations, Bradley, his father said, his voice carrying the weight of family legacy. 4 generations of Wellingtons have walked through Harvard's gates. Your great-grandfather helped build this country's industrial foundation after graduating from Harvard. Your grandfather revolutionized international banking with his Harvard connections. I built my empire using the network I made at Harvard Business School. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his chair as his father slid a newspaper clipping across the polished table. The headline read, "Local teen called rising star by academic experts." There was Marcus Johnson's photo, smiling confidently, with quotes from teachers calling him extraordinary and once-in-a-generation brilliant. "This," his father continued, tapping the article with his manicured finger, "is what people are saying about some transfer student who's been at Whitmore for 2 months. 2 months, Bradley. You've been there your entire academic career, and where are the articles about you?" The silence stretched until his father delivered the final blow. "Failure is not an option in this family. I don't care what you have to do, but you will not be the first Wellington in 4 generations to break our Harvard tradition. Do I make myself clear?" That conversation haunted Brad as he walked through Whitmore's halls, watching Marcus continue to excel effortlessly. But it was what he overheard 3 days later that gave him the ammunition he needed. Brad was walking past Mrs. Stevens' classroom when he heard her talking to another teacher. "These urban students," she was saying, her voice dripping with disdain, "they come here with their attitudes, thinking they know better than teachers who've been here for decades. They don't respect our traditions, our standards. Some of them probably don't even belong here academically. Who knows what kind of grade inflation they had at their previous schools." Brad stopped dead in his tracks. Here was his opportunity. Here was someone who shared his resentment. Someone in a position of power who might be willing to help him reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. After school that day, Brad approached Mrs. Stevens privately in her classroom. "Mrs. Stevens," he began carefully, "I've been watching Marcus Johnson, and some things just don't add up." Mrs. Stevens looked up with interest. "What do you mean, Bradley?" "Well," Brad continued, fabricating smoothly, "have you noticed how expensive his clothes are? His backpack costs more than most people make in a month. Where's a transfer student from Chicago getting that kind of money? And he always seems to know the answers before you even finish asking the questions. It's almost like..." "Like what?" Mrs. Stevens prompted, leaning forward. "Like he might be cheating somehow. Or maybe he's involved in something else to afford all those expensive things. I mean, we all know what goes on in Chicago's schools, right? Drugs, gangs. Maybe he brought some of those connections with him." Mrs. Stevens' eyes lit up with malicious interest. She'd been looking for reasons to bring Marcus down, and here Brad was, handing her exactly what she wanted to hear. "You know, Bradley, I've had my suspicions too. His performance is almost too perfect, too polished. Real students make mistakes, show their work, struggle sometimes. But him? It's like he has all the answers handed to him." From that moment, an unholy alliance was formed. Mrs. Stevens, with her position of authority and hidden racial resentments, and Brad Wellington, with his desperate need to eliminate his competition, began plotting Marcus Johnson's downfall. But their plan hit a major snag when the mock competition results were announced. The entire school gathered in the auditorium as Principal Whitmore read out the scores that would determine who would represent Whitmore Prep at the National Science Competition. "The results are truly remarkable this year," Principal Whitmore announced. We have a perfect score of 100 points achieved by Marcus Johnson, followed by Bradley Wellington with 87 points. The auditorium erupted in applause, but Brad felt like the world was crashing down around him. A perfect score. Marcus hadn't just beaten him, he'd obliterated him. The selection committee was raving about Marcus's innovative approach to problem solving, his creative thinking, and his natural scientific intuition. But the humiliation wasn't over. That afternoon, local news stations started calling. They wanted to interview Whitmore's newest genius. They wanted to feature the incredible transfer student who was breaking academic records and impressing university recruiters across the country. The final straw came the following week when a Harvard recruiter made a special visit to Whitmore Prep. Not for Brad, despite his family's legacy and donations. The recruiter came specifically to meet Marcus Johnson. Brad watched from across the hallway as the Harvard representative shook Marcus's hand, smiled warmly, and spoke about the university's excitement to have someone of Marcus's caliber. The conversation lasted over an hour. The recruiter didn't even glance in Brad's direction. As Marcus walked away from the meeting, Ashley Morrison, Brad's own girlfriend, approached him. "Congratulations, Marcus," she said genuinely. "That's incredible that Harvard sent someone specifically for you. You really deserve it." Brad felt something snap inside him as he watched his girlfriend praise his rival. But it got worse when Connor and Dylan found him later that day. "Dude," Connor said, not even trying to hide his amusement, "did you see that Harvard guy? He didn't even know who you were. Asked someone to point out the Wellington kid, like you were just another random student." Dylan laughed harshly. "4 generations at Harvard, and you're going to be the one who breaks the streak, lost to the new kid who's been here for what, 2 months?" That night, Brad lay awake staring at the ceiling, his father's words echoing in his mind. Failure is not an option. The next morning, he knew what he had to do. Brad arrived at school early, before any other students or most teachers. He made his way to the chemistry lab using his student council key access. The advanced equipment storage was locked, but Brad had watched Mrs. Stevens open it dozens of times. He knew where she kept the backup key. His hands trembled as he carefully removed $5,000 worth of advanced spectroscopy equipment, pieces that were crucial for high-level chemical analysis, equipment that only someone with serious scientific knowledge would know how to use or sell. The genius of his plan was in its simplicity. He would plant the equipment in Marcus's locker, then create evidence suggesting Marcus was planning to sell it. Who would believe that the perfect student, the academic star, could be a thief? Using a burner phone app, Brad created fake text message threads, messages that appeared to show Marcus communicating with contacts in Chicago about moving the merchandise and splitting the profits. He made sure the language sounded authentic, like something someone from Marcus's background might use. The fake conversations included details about meeting times, pickup locations, and even references to needing money for college expenses. Something that would make the whole scheme seem more believable. Brad's hands were steady now as he planted the equipment carefully in Marcus's locker during lunch period, making sure to position it where it would be easily found during a search. Then he took screenshots of the fake text conversations, saved them to a flash drive, and prepared to present his evidence to Mrs. Stevens. That afternoon, Brad knocked on Mrs. Stevens' classroom door with his flash drive in hand and a story ready to destroy Marcus Johnson's future forever. "Mrs. Stevens," he said, his voice filled with fake concern, "I think you need to see this. I was right about Marcus Johnson all along. If you're wondering how far someone will go when their privilege is threatened, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to take a turn that will shock you to your core." The morning that would change everything started like any other at Whitmore Preparatory Academy. Students filed into advanced chemistry, settling into their seats for what they thought would be a normal class. Marcus Johnson took his usual spot in the front row, notebook ready, completely unaware that his entire future was about to be destroyed by the people he trusted most. Mrs. Rebecca Stevens walked into the classroom that morning with a performance already planned. Her face was flushed with fake outrage, her hands trembling with calculated emotion as she slammed her books down on the desk with dramatic force. "Class," she announced, her voice carrying across the silent room, "I have discovered something absolutely appalling. Someone in this school has stolen expensive laboratory equipment worth over $5,000. The students looked around at each other in shock. This was Whitmore Prep, where families donated millions and students drove cars worth more than most people's homes. Why would anyone need to steal school equipment? Mrs. Stevens continued her performance, pacing dramatically at the front of the classroom. This isn't just theft. This is a betrayal of everything Whitmore Preparatory Academy stands for. Someone has violated our trust, our traditions, our very values. She paused, letting her eyes scan the room before landing directly on Marcus. Given the serious nature of this crime, I'm demanding that all student lockers be searched immediately, starting with students who might have outside connections, who might know how to dispose of stolen scientific equipment. The implication was crystal clear to everyone in the room. She was targeting Marcus, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. Within minutes, Principal Whitmore arrived with school security. The search began with Marcus's locker, exactly as Mrs. Stevens had orchestrated. As the security guard's key turned in the lock, Marcus felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. Something was wrong. This felt too convenient, too targeted. The locker door swung open, and there it was. $5,000 worth of advanced spectroscopy equipment, carefully arranged to be immediately visible. But that wasn't all. Tucked behind the equipment were printed screenshots of text messages, conversations that appeared to show Marcus discussing selling the equipment to contacts in Chicago and splitting the profits. The security guard stepped back, stunned. Principal Whitmore's face went pale. The students in the hallway who had gathered to watch began whispering frantically among themselves. Brad Wellington and his crew were standing nearby, and their performance was Oscar-worthy. "Oh my God," Brad gasped, his hand covering his mouth in fake shock. "Marcus, how could you do this?" Connor Hayes shook his head in disappointment. "We trusted you, man. We welcomed you into our school, and this is how you repay us?" Dylan Pierce crossed his arms, his voice dripping with betrayal. "I can't believe it. I actually defended you when people said you didn't belong here." But Ashley Morrison was watching the scene unfold with growing suspicion. She knew her boyfriend and his friends too well. The timing was too perfect, the discovery too convenient. She watched Brad's face carefully and saw something that made her stomach turn, satisfaction hidden behind his mask of shock. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the equipment he'd never seen before, reading text messages he'd never sent. "This isn't mine," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "I've never seen this equipment before in my life, and I definitely didn't send these messages." Mrs. Stevens stepped forward, her voice rising with fake indignation. "Mr. Johnson, the evidence is right here in your locker. Are you going to stand there and lie to all of us?" But Marcus Johnson was not going to be intimidated, not even in the face of planted evidence and false accusations. His mind, trained by years of academic excellence, began working through the situation logically. "Mrs. Stevens," he said calmly, "think about this rationally. Why would I steal equipment from a class where I have the highest grade? Why would I risk my Harvard admission, my entire future, for $5,000 when my family clearly has the means to afford whatever I need?" His calm logic only seemed to infuriate Mrs. Stevens more. "Don't you dare lecture me about logic when you're caught red-handed," Marcus continued, his voice remaining steady. "I'm asking for a fair investigation. Check the security cameras in the hallways. See who had access to my locker. Examine the metadata on these text messages. Any real investigation would show that I'm innocent." But Mrs. Stevens was beyond reason now. She had committed to this path, and Marcus's rational defense was making her look foolish in front of the entire school. "How dare you make demands?" she screamed. "You're a thief and a liar." That's when Brad Wellington decided to add fuel to the fire. He stepped forward, his voice filled with fake concern. "Mrs. Stevens, I hate to say this, but Marcus has been acting strange lately. Yesterday he seemed really aggressive when I tried to talk to him, and just now, the way he's raising his voice at you." "I'm not raising my voice," Marcus said calmly, but Mrs. Stevens was already spiraling into hysteria. "Yes, you are," she shrieked. "You're getting aggressive. You're making threats." Marcus looked around the hallway at his classmates, confusion and hurt evident on his face. "I'm not making threats. I'm asking for a fair investigation. I'm innocent." But Brad wasn't finished. "Mrs. Stevens, maybe we should call security. He's getting more agitated and I'm worried about everyone's safety." That was the moment Mrs. Stevens completely lost control. Her racial resentments, her hatred of seeing Marcus succeed, her fury at being logically challenged by someone she considered beneath her, it all exploded in a moment of pure hysteria. "Get away from me! He's dangerous!" she screamed, backing away from Marcus as if he were a physical threat. The hallway erupted into chaos. Students gasped and pulled out their phones, recording the insanity unfolding before them. Marcus raised his hands defensively, backing away in confusion and hurt. "Mrs. Stevens, please, you know me. I've been nothing but respectful. Why are you doing this?" But she was already dialing 911, her voice hysterical and breathless. "911? I need police immediately. I have a violent black student threatening me and other students. He's completely out of control." The dispatcher's voice could be heard asking for details, and Mrs. Stevens provided them with dramatic flair. "He's been getting increasingly aggressive. He has a history of threatening behavior towards staff. I think he might be on drugs. His behavior is erratic and dangerous. Officers, please hurry. He's getting more violent by the second." Marcus felt the world crashing down around him. This woman who had taught him for months, who knew his character, his work ethic, his respectful nature, was describing him to police as a dangerous criminal. "Mrs. Stevens, please," Marcus pleaded, his voice breaking with emotion. "Don't you dare talk back to me," she screamed into the phone. "Officers, hurry, he's getting more aggressive." The sound of sirens began wailing in the distance, growing closer and closer. Within minutes, Officers Collins and Hayes arrived at Whitmore Preparatory Academy, expecting to find a dangerous situation requiring immediate action. What they saw when they walked through those doors was a composed, articulate young black man in an expensive, private school uniform, standing calmly with his hands visible, surrounded by other well-dressed students. But instead of recognizing the obvious disconnect between the emergency call and the reality in front of them, Officers Collins and Hayes immediately made assumptions based on their own prejudices. They saw a young black man at an elite white institution and assumed he didn't belong there. They saw Mrs. Stevens' hysteria and believed her story without question. They saw Marcus's calm demeanor and interpreted it as suspicious rather than innocent. "Are you the kid causing trouble?" Officer Collins barked as he approached Marcus. "No, sir," Marcus replied respectfully. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm being falsely accused of stealing equipment that was planted in my locker." Officer Hayes laughed mockingly. "Sure you are, kid. That's what they all say." What none of them knew, not Mrs. Stevens, not Brad Wellington, not Officers Collins and Hayes, was that Marcus Johnson had just made a phone call that would change everything. A simple call to his mother, who would be arriving at Whitmore Preparatory Academy very, very soon. And when she did, everyone involved in this false accusation would learn exactly who they had been messing with. If you were in Marcus's shoes, what would you have done? Would you call your mother or try to prove your innocence yourself? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button now. The moment Officers Collins and Hayes approached Marcus Johnson, their aggression was immediate and unmistakable. They had arrived expecting to handle a dangerous criminal, and nothing Marcus said could change their predetermined narrative. Hands behind your back now, Officer Collins barked, not even bothering to assess the situation or listen to explanations. Marcus remained calm, his voice respectful but firm. Officers, there's been a serious misunderstanding. I'm a student here. This equipment was planted in my locker. I can prove my innocence if you'll just listen to the facts. Officer Hayes laughed mockingly. Listen to the facts? Kid, we've heard every sob story in the book. You think because you can talk fancy that makes you innocent? I have perfect grades here, Marcus continued, trying to reason with them. I'm being recruited by Harvard. Why would I risk everything to steal equipment I don't even need? Harvard? Officer Collins snorted. Right? And I'm the president. You probably don't even go to school here. Probably broke in to steal stuff. The officers refused to listen to a single word Marcus said. They mocked his intelligence, dismissed his explanations, and treated him like a common criminal despite his obvious composure and articulate manner. Please, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the injustice unfolding around him. I need to call my mother. I have the right to make a phone call. Both officers burst into cruel laughter. Mommy can't help you now, boy, Officer Hayes sneered. You're in the real world now. Principal Whitmore had been watching the scene unfold with growing unease. Something about Marcus's calm demeanor, his consistent story, the way he carried himself, it didn't match what Mrs. Stevens was claiming. Finally, his conscience got the better of him. Officers, Principal Whitmore interrupted. Perhaps we should allow the student to make his phone call. It's standard procedure, and we want to handle this properly. Officer Collins glared at the principal but grudgingly agreed. Fine. One call. Make it quick. Marcus was handed a phone with shaking hands, not from fear, but from the overwhelming injustice of the situation. He dialed a number he knew by heart and waited for the familiar voice to answer. Mom, he said simply when she picked up, I'm at school. They're arresting me for something I didn't do. They've been trying to get rid of me for months, and now they're calling me dangerous. Then he hung up. No dramatics, no pleading, no long explanations. Just a simple factual statement to his mother about what was happening. The officers laughed at the brevity of the call. That's it? Officer Hayes mocked. Guess Mommy's not that interested in helping after all. But Marcus knew something they didn't. He knew exactly who his mother was, and he knew that within minutes, everything was about to change at Whitmore Preparatory Academy. 7 minutes later, the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up to the school's main entrance caught everyone's attention. But these weren't ordinary cars. They were black SUVs with government license plates, the kind that signal serious federal business. The first person to step out of the lead vehicle was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, carrying herself with the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to wielding serious power. Behind her emerged federal agents, their badges clearly visible, their expressions grim and professional. Victoria Johnson, Attorney General of the United States, walked through the doors of Whitmore Preparatory Academy with the controlled fury of a mother whose child has been wronged, and the institutional power to do something about it. The moment Officers Collins and Hayes saw her approaching with federal agents, their faces drained of all color. They had no idea who she was yet, but everything about her presence screamed federal authority, and they suddenly realized they might have made a catastrophic mistake. I'm Attorney General Victoria Johnson, she announced, her voice carrying the quiet authority that comes with being one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the country. And I believe you gentlemen have arrested my son. The silence in that hallway was deafening. Mrs. Stevens's face went white as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. Principal Whitmore looked like he might faint. Brad Wellington, who had been watching his plan unfold perfectly, suddenly looked terrified. Ma'am, Officer Collins stammered, we were responding to a 911 call about a violent student. A violent student? Victoria Johnson's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. You mean my son Marcus, honor roll student, Harvard-bound, who has never had so much as a detention in his entire academic career? She gestured to the federal agents behind her. Agents, I want you to immediately review all security footage from this school for the past 24 hours. I want those text messages analyzed for metadata and origin. And I want a complete investigation into every aspect of this incident. The federal agents moved with swift efficiency. Within minutes, they had commandeered the school's security office and were reviewing footage from multiple cameras throughout the building. Attorney General Johnson, one of the agents, called out after just 10 minutes of review, "You need to see this." On the security monitors, clear as day, was footage of Brad Wellington entering the chemistry lab early that morning, using a key to access the equipment storage, and carefully removing the expensive spectroscopy equipment. Additional footage showed him at Marcus's locker, planting the equipment inside. But that wasn't all. The agents had also discovered months of security footage showing systematic harassment that the school administration had ignored. The bullying, the intimidation, the coordinated campaign to drive Marcus away. It was all there, documented in high definition. The text messages were traced within minutes. The metadata showed they had originated from a phone registered to Brad Wellington III, created using a fake number app, and sent to a phone that had never been in Marcus's possession. Victoria Johnson reviewed the evidence with the controlled fury of someone who had spent her career prosecuting criminals and now realized her own son had been the victim of a sophisticated frame-up. She turned to face Mrs. Stevens, Officers Collins and Hayes, and the assembled crowd with the quiet authority that had made her one of the most feared prosecutors in the country. "Let me explain what has happened here," she began, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "My son, Marcus Johnson, a 17-year-old honor student with a 4.0 GPA and perfect SAT scores, has been the victim of a coordinated campaign of racial harassment, systematic bullying, and ultimately criminal conspiracy." Mrs. Stevens tried to speak, but Victoria Johnson's raised hand silenced her immediately. "Mrs. Stevens, you have falsely accused my son of theft, filed a fraudulent police report, and made false statements to emergency services about his character and behavior. Officers Collins and Hayes, you have violated my son's civil rights through discriminatory treatment and failure to conduct a proper investigation." The domino effect began immediately. Victoria Johnson had the authority to make arrests on the spot for federal civil rights violations, and she wasn't hesitating to use it. "Officers Collins and Hayes, you are under arrest for violation of federal civil rights laws under Title 18, Section 242. You have the right to remain silent." The two officers who had been so confident and mocking minutes earlier were now being handcuffed by federal agents, their careers destroyed in an instant. "Mrs. Stevens, you are terminated from your position effective immediately. You will face federal charges for filing false police reports and civil rights violations. The Department of Justice will be pursuing this case personally." Mrs. Stevens collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably as she realized her 20-year career, her reputation, her entire life had been destroyed by her own prejudices and actions. "Brad Wellington, you are under arrest for theft, conspiracy, filing false police reports, and civil rights violations. Connor Hayes, Dylan Pierce, Jason Thornfield, you are all suspended pending a full federal investigation into your coordinated harassment campaign." Brad's face went ashen as federal agents approached him with handcuffs. His carefully planned scheme had not only failed, but had resulted in federal charges that would follow him for the rest of his life. "Principal Whitmore, you are being placed on administrative leave pending investigation into your failure to address systematic bullying and civil rights violations occurring at your institution. This entire school will be subject to federal oversight and investigation." Under the pressure of federal investigation, Brad's crew immediately crumbled. Connor Hayes was the first to break, confessing to the systematic harassment campaign within hours. "We were trying to get him to leave," he admitted through tears. "Brad said he didn't belong here, that he was taking what was rightfully ours." Dylan Pierce revealed the months of coordinated bullying, the planned attacks, the deliberate campaign to destroy Marcus's reputation. We thought if we made his life miserable enough, he'd transfer back to Chicago. Jason Thornfield's family, seeing the federal investigation and media attention, immediately cut all ties with their son to avoid scandal. His father released a public statement disowning Jason's actions and distancing the family from the incident. But it was Brad Wellington's complete breakdown that provided the most damning testimony. Facing serious federal charges that could result in years in prison, and with his family's reputation in ruins, Brad confessed everything. Through tears and hyperventilation, he admitted to the jealousy that had consumed him when Marcus outperformed him academically. He confessed to orchestrating the systematic bullying campaign, to stealing the chemistry equipment, to creating the fake text messages, to manipulating Mrs. Stevens into making the false accusations. "I couldn't let him beat me," Brad sobbed during his confession. "4 generations of my family went to Harvard. I was supposed to be the best, the smartest, but he came from nowhere and made me look like nothing. I had to get rid of him." The final humiliation came when Brad's own father, William Wellington Jr., held a press conference to publicly disown his son. "The Wellington family has always stood for excellence and integrity," he stated coldly. "Bradley's actions do not represent our values, and we are cutting all ties with him to preserve our family's reputation." Within 24 hours, Marcus Johnson had gone from being arrested as a criminal to being vindicated as the victim of the most sophisticated harassment and conspiracy case in private school history. The truth had come out, justice was being served, and everyone who had wronged him was facing the consequences of their actions. But the story wasn't over yet, because Marcus Johnson and his mother, Attorney General Victoria Johnson, were about to use this incident to change not just Whitmore Preparatory Academy, but the entire system of elite education in America. 3 months later, the world looked completely different for everyone involved in the Whitmore Preparatory Academy scandal. The consequences of that fateful day had created a powerful story of justice, transformation, and the ultimate triumph of truth over prejudice. Marcus Johnson was exactly where he belonged, thriving at Harvard University with a full scholarship. The same young man who had been handcuffed and falsely accused was now excelling at one of the world's most prestigious institutions. His dorm room was filled with acceptance letters from other Ivy League schools that had tried to recruit him after the story went national. His professors were amazed by his analytical abilities and mature perspective. But what impressed them most was his determination to help others facing similar challenges. He had started a support group for minority students dealing with discrimination and was working with Harvard's administration to develop new anti-bias policies. "What happened at Whitmore was terrible," Marcus told a Harvard reporter, "but it showed that even in the most privileged environments, truth and justice can prevail if you have the courage to stand up for what's right." Meanwhile, Mrs. Rebecca Stevens was living a very different reality. The woman who had once commanded respect as a chemistry teacher at an elite prep school was now working the night shift at a gas station. Her criminal trial had been a media sensation. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, the recorded 911 call, testimony from students who had witnessed her discriminatory behavior. She had been sentenced to 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. Her teaching license was permanently revoked. She faced a massive civil lawsuit that would bankrupt her. Most devastating of all, her own children had stopped speaking to her, ashamed of what their mother had become. As she stood behind bulletproof glass at 2 a.m. selling cigarettes and lottery tickets, Mrs. Stevens had plenty of time to think about how her 20-year career had been destroyed in a single moment of racist hatred and poor judgment. But the most dramatic fall belonged to Brad Wellington III. The young man destined for Harvard, who had walked Whitmore's halls like he owned them, was now serving time in juvenile detention with his entire future in ruins. The federal charges had been serious. theft, conspiracy, filing false police reports, civil rights violations. During sentencing, Brad had broken down completely. "I destroyed everything," he cried to the judge. "I destroyed Marcus's reputation, my own future, my family's name. And for what? Because I was jealous?" The judge showed no mercy. Brad received 18 months in juvenile detention, 3 years probation, and 1,000 hours of community service. All his college prospects had evaporated. Harvard had rescinded their interest. Even state schools refused his applications. His father had followed through on disowning him, and the Wellington family had donated millions to civil rights organizations to salvage their reputation. His former friends suffered their own consequences. Connor was kicked off the football team and expelled. Dylan was stripped of his student presidency. Jason's family had disowned him and moved him to another state. Officers Collins and Hayes were serving federal prison sentences. Isolated in protective custody, their law enforcement careers permanently over. But the most dramatic transformation occurred at Whitmore Preparatory Academy itself. The federal investigation had uncovered decades of discriminatory practices. The Department of Justice filed a comprehensive civil rights lawsuit that forced complete institutional overhaul. Under federal oversight, Whitmore was required to achieve 40% minority enrollment within 2 years. The school that had been overwhelmingly white and wealthy was now genuinely diverse. Mandatory bias training was implemented for all staff. The Wellington Science Wing was renamed the Marcus Johnson Center for Academic Excellence. The most powerful moment came when Marcus returned as a guest speaker for their new diversity program. The auditorium was packed with students, many of them minorities who would never have had opportunities under the old system. "I won't lie to you," Marcus told the audience. "What happened to me here was traumatic and wrong. But I learned that truth is stronger than lies, that justice is more powerful than prejudice, and that one person's courage can change an entire institution." He looked at the diverse faces in the crowd. "Some of you are here because of what happened to me. Don't waste that opportunity. Use it to become leaders and change makers in your own right." The standing ovation lasted several minutes. After his speech, Marcus met with students facing their own challenges. One young Latina student told him, "After hearing your story, I know I have the strength to stand up for myself and report the bullying I'm experiencing." A young black student said, "You showed me that being smart and successful isn't something to be ashamed of. I'm going to keep pursuing my dreams, no matter what anyone says." These conversations reminded Marcus why his ordeal had been worth it. His courage had created opportunities for countless students who would benefit from Whitmore's transformation. The legal consequences continued unfolding. The civil lawsuit resulted in a multi-million-dollar settlement funding scholarships for minority students nationwide. The criminal cases ended with maximum sentences, sending a clear message about civil rights violations. Marcus had become a sought-after speaker at educational conferences and civil rights events. He testified before Congress about stronger enforcement needs in educational settings. Through all the attention, he remained focused on his government studies with a civil rights focus, planning to advocate for students facing discrimination. "Marcus has always been special," his mother told the Washington Post, "but what impressed me most wasn't his intelligence. It was his character. Even when falsely accused and mistreated, he never lost his dignity or commitment to doing what was right." As Marcus walked across Harvard Yard to constitutional law class, he often thought about how different his life might have been if he had given in to the harassment and transferred back to Chicago. But he had chosen to stay and fight, trusting in truth and justice, even when lies and prejudice seemed to be winning. His story had become more than individual triumph. It was a symbol of the ongoing struggle for equality in American education and proof that positive change was possible when people stood up for what was right. If this story of courage, justice, and transformation has inspired you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us continue bringing you these important narratives that show how ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Now I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in an educational setting? What do you think schools can do to create more inclusive environments? Marcus's story shows us that change is possible, but it requires all of us to speak up when we see injustice. They thought they could break me with bullying, lies, and false accusations, Marcus reflected during his Harvard graduation speech 3 years later. They learned that truth and justice always win in the end. But more importantly, they learned that when you try to destroy someone's future because of prejudice and hate, then you ultimately destroy your own. Marcus Johnson's story was just the beginning of a life dedicated to justice, education, and creating opportunities for others. In a world still struggling with racism and discrimination, his example served as a powerful reminder that individual courage and moral clarity could still change the world. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.